want to start off by thanking our vendors as well as our speakers for coming to this event and being part of it and helping our community to be prepared for hurricanes. Also, I want to thank HEB for donating the hot dogs and refreshments that we'll be having after the event. Today, our speakers will inform us about hurricanes and why it's important to be prepared, and tips as well as on how to be prepared for hurricane season. We ask that you keep your questions till the end. We'll have a question and answer session at the end. And with that being said, we will start off with our very first speaker, Ms. Terralyn Tarleton, who will give us some opening remarks.
I am the Mayor Pro Tem. My name is Terralyn Tarleton. And on behalf of our City Council, we are so enthused that you came out today. We'd like to introduce our other council members that are here today, and that is Councilman Craig Brown. Where are you? Right here. Can you come up here, please, so everybody can see you? And then we have Councilwoman Carolyn Sinceri. Will you please come up here? Because I want y'all to get to know these people and ask them any questions or any advice that you have to give. Please feel free to talk to them because these council people do care about your thoughts and concerns and need to hear that, or any recommendations that you feel that the city needs to do this hurricane season, like when we evacuate and we do have a storm coming back earlier. Whatever it is you need to talk to us today, please do that. So wave your hands. So can y'all see them? Because I want to make sure you can see them. All righty. Also, too, we've got guest speakers today that we are excited that they're here today. They've got some very good advice to give you. Please listen to them and take their advice and make sure the ones that are not sitting here today next to you, like your neighbors, go out into your neighborhoods and spread the word. Also, too, check out who are the shut-ins that are in your neighborhoods because they're going to need some help, too, when it comes that time to evacuate. And if you can also look around this room today, it's not full. And what does that mean to us? That means people are not taking this seriously anymore because Hurricane Ike was in 2008. But June 1st, which is just Monday, starts our official hurricane season. And believe me, we can have that storm this year and be in the exact same predicament as we were with Hurricane Ike or even worse. So when we give that sound of evacuate, please take it seriously. Because you do your part as a citizen of Galveston by leaving the island so that the people that are in charge can make sure that if we have that storm, we can get our city together as soon as possible to welcome you back on this island. Thank you all again for coming. We are greatly appreciated that you're here. Thank you.
Our guest speaker today is Frank Billingsley. Mr. Billingsley is a chief meteorologist for KPRC Channel 2. Frank enjoys sharing complex weather information in such a way that is clear and easy to understand. He takes pride in using his expertise and experience as a meteorologist as a way of giving back to the community. Please welcome Frank Billingsley.
Yeah, I was sounding like 21 back there, wasn't it? I'm Frank Billingsley, and I'm not a BOI. But I have bought on the island and I have built on the island. And building on the island is a lot harder than being born on the island. I can tell you that. So I'm kind of an IBC Islander by choice, but I like to think of myself as an IBB, which is Islander by baptism, because if you were here during Hurricane Ike, then you were baptized into the island life and what we go through and how quickly we help each other and how quickly we recover. So that's the upside. We've been looking at the hurricane season, and I know you've heard the forecast, and it's probably goes something like this. Well, there's an El Nino, and the water's cooler in the Atlantic, and it's just not going to be that bad. In fact, the National Hurricane Center came out with their forecast, which was for anywhere from a below-average season to an average season, with a 70% chance that it will be below average. Well, we've already had Tropical Storm Ana, which hit the Carolinas. And if you talk to anybody in Southeast Texas from last week, we had Tropical Storm Tuesday that just hit us there. So it doesn't really take a lot to get your attention. And that's what we have to emphasize. Now, so coincidentally, I got a note from Ken Hoffman, you know, the columnist from the Houston Chronicle today, because he had seen obviously what the floods had done. And he said, how did this differ from Tropical Storm Allison? Was it worse? Was it better? What was the communication? In fact, a number of people have said, well, this is the worst thing we've ever seen, which statistically, it isn't by any means. In fact, Allison, in terms of homes that were flooded, it was 20 times more homes that were flooded. And in terms of cars, it was 100 times more cars that were flooded. So it depends on how you look at it. The difference is this storm we saw. The social media has made such an amazing difference in the way we're informed, the way we communicate with the National Weather Service and the Flood Control District, the EMS people that are here. The communication between us alone is so much stronger than it has ever been. And then with you, it is so much stronger than it has ever been. With Twitter and Facebook and web apps and websites and emails and viewer pictures and viewer videos, we are all getting the messages and we are all transferring them to each other, and we're seeing it real time. When you think back to Allison, we didn't get pictures until the next day when the Chronicle was able to get out there and give us newspaper pictures, and we were able to fly a helicopter over it. This storm, we were getting pictures as it was happening from all over the community, and we still are. I mean, today we can show you pictures of what the Brazos River looks like right now from just a person with a cell phone. So that's an amazing part of it, and we tend to take it for granted, and some people think that they're beyond it. And that's one of my messages for you today, that if you're one of the people, I mean, my mother still thinks that you need stamps for email. And I get that. I mean, if we were all so smart, we would have all invested in Facebook back in 2006 and we'd all be rich. But we didn't, because we didn't understand the power of it. Who thought, gosh, what's this going to do? Facebook, free and always will be. How are they ever going to make any money? How's it ever going to be worth anything? I'm not investing in that. Do you know that the company that owns Channel 2 is the Graham family that sold the Washington Post? The Graham family was offered the first chance to buy into Facebook and said, how's that going to make money? Channel 2 would own Facebook. But you all own Facebook if you want to. All of us are part of this community. And they'll tell you in quick snippets, in order to prepare for a hurricane season, have a plan, make a kit, know your neighbors. And some people say, well, if you know your neighbors really well, then you can borrow their kit and follow their plan, and you got 2 out of 3 right there. All of that's really easy to think about, and so few people really do it until it's time to do it. They don't make the kit. There are a lot of people here that will tell you what you need in it. They don't make the plan. There are plenty of emergency officials here that will tell you what the plan needs to be, and they still don't do it. And as Carolyn pointed out, know your neighbors, but they got to be here. You got to know them. So the key is to stay informed. That's really the easiest takeaway, because if you are constantly staying informed, then, and it's so easy to do now, then when the time is even nearing a week in advance, then you'll start getting hints of what you need to do, what you'll need to have, where you'll need to go, how bad is this going to be, what we're facing, how long is it going to last, as much as we can know. So if nothing else, and I know you don't need the lecture. You're here today because you know exactly probably what to do in terms of facing a storm. But your neighbors may not. And that's where we can help each other, is to pass the word that they, if nothing else, because if you go tell them buy water and buy a first aid kit and get their prescriptions ready, and they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. Get them informed, get them to be a part of social media, get them to be not just to watch TV, but to be a whole part of this thing that's going on in our world, so that when the time comes, they will be there and they will know what to do. There's these clever sayings that the National Weather Service has, like, turn around, don't drown. When thunder roars, get indoors. Don't be a fool, get out of the pool. I love them all. So I made one up. Lance, are you listening? Because I want the National Weather Service to adopt it. Beat the storm, stay informed. That's easy to remember, and that will do it. Beat the storm, stay informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Our next speaker is Garrett Foskett. Garrett currently serves as the interim emergency management for Galveston County, as well as a nuisance abatement officer. Garrett has assisted in many, many storms over the past 20 years working for Galveston County.
Good morning, y'all. My name's Garrett Foskett. Thank you very much, Rosanna. And the county's role is to assist the city. So when the city needs help, they come to the county, and the county then asks the state for that assistance. So I've worked with your mayor for 16 years when he was at the county. Worked with your city manager, Charlie Kelly. I've known him for 20 years. Peter Davis, your fire chief, Wisco. Everybody here I've worked with and know, and we are here to support you all. So I guess the two things I really want y'all to do is make sure you sign up with the city to get announcements. And if your neighbors aren't here, please let them know. I know a lot of people stop listening to the radio. Everything is through the phone, and that's the best way that we can keep you informed, is making sure that you get that information. The other thing is, if there's people that need assistance on leaving, please get them to also sign up on the 211. And now is the time to do it, not when the storm is hitting and the roads are closed and we can't get out. And when the city asks you to leave, please leave. We don't want to put our lives at risk trying to save y'all, but there comes a time during that storm when we won't be able to get out there and save y'all. So for your safety, if the city asks you to leave, please evacuate. And that makes life easier. And then with that notification, they'll also notify you when it's okay to come back. I really don't have too much more to say because it's the city, it's their job, and we are, like I said, here to support y'all. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, so we did have the Department of Public Safety and Texas Division of Emergency Management on the agenda, but they were not able to be here today because of all the other stuff that we have going on in Texas. So we will move to UTMB. We have Dr. Rogers, who is the Vice President and Chief Medical Officer for the University of Texas Medical Branch here in Galveston. Dr. Rogers will tell you more about how UTMB prepares for hurricanes.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Rogers. I'm actually BOI, but not this island. I was born in St. Thomas, and it's another island, and certainly have lived through hurricanes. It's a important topic, and I think I have 5 things that I'm going to try to leave you with. First is listen to your local emergency medicine staff and the mayor and others when the order comes to evacuate. Those decisions are never made lightly, and in the context of the decision, once the decision gets made, Frank, I can't remember the moniker you just used, but beat the storm, stay informed. The second I would say is communicate. You have to have a communication plan with your family, particularly if you end up being in different places at the same time. So have a communication plan. How will you communicate with your family members? How will you, get your dog taken care of? Have a plan for those things. And then the last statement I'll make has to do with your health. So UTMB Health is obviously the dominant healthcare provider in Galveston County. In the context of that reality, it's important, I think, to do and consider to do 3 things related to your own personal health and your family's health. First, if you are a UTMB patient, sign up for MyChart. It's a key resource that provides you access to your medical history and your pharmacy records wherever you may be. So if you evacuate to Louisiana, you evacuate to your family in Madison, Wisconsin, you will have access to your individual health information and your family's health information through MyChart. The second is, if you take medications, if you can have some stash supply, it'll get you through a day, a week where you may not have access to your local pharmacy. And then the third recommendation is if you do have special medical needs, sign up through the City of Galveston for an evacuation program and plan, because you don't want to be trying to make that plan the days ahead of the storm. So lessons basically are listen to your local officials, sign up for my chart and other ways to get your personal health information and make that available to you from a health perspective, and then finally to plan for the storm and be ahead of it. I look forward to any questions that you may have from a UTB health perspective at the end of this session. Rosanna.
Alrighty, our next speaker is Lance Wood. Lance is a meteorologist for the National Weather Service from our Houston Galveston Weather Office. Welcome, Lance.
Well, good morning, and thanks for coming out. It's good to see you all out here. I'm actually, as the slide says, I'm with the National Weather Service Houston Galveston office. We're located just a little north of here in League City. We are part of the federal government, so I am part of NOAA. We work for the taxpayer, so we work for you guys. I thought I'd start off with showing you how long it's been since some of the storms you may or may not remember have happened, a few benchmarks up there. So I believe Bill is going to speak next about Hurricane Ike, but it has been 7 years, almost 7 years since Ike. I did work Ike, so I was at the office when the eye wall came over and experienced some of the 80 to 85 mile an hour winds there in League City. Scary storm surge, and Bill will talk. I guess Bill's going to talk about Rita actually, but Ike, the last storm that really affected Galveston with the big storm surge. So I'm going to show you a couple products a little bit later in the talk that might help you ahead of a storm surge kind of know what we might be in for. So hopefully we'll be a little bit more prepared should the next Ike-like storm come up this way. Also been 10 years since the U.S. has experienced a major hurricane landfall. That's Category 3 or more on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale, and that scale rates the hurricane by the wind speed. So it's been a long time since the U.S. has seen a big windstorm. You know, Ike brought a big surge, but didn't bring the winds that some of the historic hurricanes have brought. That 10-year drought is the longest drought that we've had for a major hurricane landfall in the U.S. So that's fairly significant, and as a meteorologist, it's a little bit worrisome that we might have been forgetting what the powerful winds of a hurricane can do, especially when they're well over 100 miles an hour. That's a different animal than getting an 80 or 90 mile an hour wind, because the force of the wind speed is not linear to the wind speed. It goes up exponentially. So as your wind speed goes up a little bit, your damage potential goes up a lot. So that has me a little concerned. And then 32 years, wow, I'm getting old, since Hurricane Alicia, because I was 14 when Hurricane Alicia made landfall in Galveston, or near Galveston, just to the southwest. And I lived in Sharpstown, and Alicia tore down all of our fences, and I remember putting the boards up on our Sharpstown house with my father. I remember it came through in the early morning hours. It was still dark outside, and I remember tree limbs hitting the boards. And, you know, I was a kid, and I thought it was cool, you know, and it actually got me interested in meteorology, so it had that plus. But, yeah, I'm 46, so it's been a long time since we've seen a major hurricane, you know, wind speed-wise affect this area. So just a reminder, Alicia was a small hurricane, didn't generate the storm surge that we saw with Ike, but as far as a wind producer, also produced quite a few tornadoes. It was quite significant. So just a few reminders there for you. So the main subject is what's going to happen this year. And my parent agency, NOAA, actually puts out an outlook for the hurricane season. And as Frank alluded to, we are expecting a below normal season. 70%. I might actually go a little higher than that on the percentage if I was actually making this forecast, because it looks like we're going to have a significant El Nino event in the tropical Pacific. And we're already actually at El Nino status, and pretty much every reliable model that forecasts water temperatures in the Pacific is showing us that we will have an even stronger El Nino than what we're currently experiencing. So I think it's a slam dunk. We're going to have a significant El Nino, might be one of the more significant El Ninos we've experienced. So what does that exactly mean? Well, El Nino is not the Chris Farley sketch that you might have seen on Saturday Night Live, although it was probably a good try. What it actually is warmer than normal water in the tropical Pacific. And you might say, well, that's interesting. That goes on in the Pacific. Why are we talking about reducing hurricanes in the Atlantic? Well, you got to remember the atmosphere and the ocean are coupled. So what goes on in the ocean, especially a large-scale event like an El Nino, affects the wind patterns that blows across the whole tropics. So what ends up happening is you get stronger than normal winds throughout the tropical Atlantic, and hurricanes don't like strong winds in the middle part of the atmosphere because it disrupts their circulation. So it makes it harder for a hurricane to develop in the core of the tropics in the Atlantic. So that's really what's going on this year, is we think we're going to see those stronger winds creating wind shear, making it more difficult for hurricanes to develop. But notice I said the deep tropics, and that's interesting, and we'll get back to that. So I know this is a little bit difficult to see because of the lighting, but I actually created this graphic myself. I looked at the previous significant El Nino events that we've seen since 1950 and plotted all the landfalls of hurricanes during those seasons in the Western Gulf. I didn't bother with the Atlantic or the Eastern Gulf because obviously we care about the Western Gulf. There's actually 12 of them, and I think there was 11 years that ended up in this database, and 8 out of 12 formed in the Gulf. So to me, that's a little concerning because it's the kind of year that the odds may be up a little bit for a Gulf former versus the long track hurricanes. Now, we did see a couple of long track hurricanes in this database. There's Andrew from 1992, a Cat 5, that impacted South Florida and Louisiana. And then we also had Major Hurricane Audrey in that database that was a Gulf former. But notice, it's kind of, like I said, it's a little bit hard to see, but in the Caribbean and out in the Atlantic, there's not much going on in this graphic. That's because the wind shear is too strong for the hurricanes to really get going in what we consider the main development region, which is the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean. So a little bit further north, though, as you get towards the Bahamas and into the Gulf of Mexico, the El Nino doesn't necessarily have the same impact that it does in the deep tropics. So we still need to look in our backyard this year, and we may have, the kind of storm that only gives us 2 days of notice. So I want you to be cognizant of that fact. So although the overall activity in the basin we mean the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, and the Gulf, will probably be down this year, I think we need to be looking close to home because the long track hurricanes will probably not be there, or if they are, only be 1 or 2 of them. So I'd like to advertise some good things that have happened since Ike. And some of these are due to the work of Bill Reed when he was at the Hurricane Center. He really pushed, we need more products to educate people with storm surge threat. So fortunately, his efforts have come to fruition, and one of these products that's new this year is called a potential storm surge flooding graphic. And this is available on the National Hurricane Center's website. It's still considered an experimental product, and we're still getting feedback on it. But basically what it is, it's a reasonable worst-case scenario of what could happen with water levels based on computer modeling. And it'll be available once a watch or a warning is issued. And the color that you see on the map, this is an Ike-like scenario that we've got broadcast up here. But what it tells you, it does the math for you. It knows the elevation of the land. It knows how much water will be coming. And so we do a simple subtraction to give you an inundation map. So how much water is over the land. So you see the red areas, that's significant storm surge flooding. And then where you see the blue areas, that's less than 3 feet, for example. So it's color-coded based on how much water will be over the land. A very useful product. We'll be using this in briefings from our office should we have a threat of a significant storm surge. Now, what kind of ties in along with this, additional awareness and new products, is a storm surge watch and warning. Very similar to a hurricane watch or warning. We issue the hurricane watch or warning for wind speed. Well, the storm surge watch warning will be for the storm surge. Might not be the same area. In fact, in many cases, it will extend further to the right of a hurricane than the actual hurricane warning because the water will pile up well to the east of the landfalling major hurricane. So as you see an example here from Katrina, what it might look like in blue would be the storm surge warning area, see, going all the way to the Florida Panhandle, while the hurricane warnings are focused more on Louisiana and Mississippi and maybe into Alabama a little bit. So this gives more awareness that not only can things happen out of that cone that everybody's familiar with, but you can have significant storm surge outside of the very high winds as well. So I'm excited about these products. I think they will raise awareness and help people know a little bit better about what's coming when we're speaking about water. And just to give you an idea of what we're actually targeting for a watch or a warning, it's where we have inundation that would be greater than 3 feet. So it's significant storm surge. A life-threatening storm surge is what's being targeted. Well, I want to thank you for your attention, and I know the previous speakers have indicated that we need to have a plan, a personal plan. I want to echo that. Now is the time to think about that. June 1st, right around the corner on Monday. We need to be ready because one of those hurricanes I showed you on the graphic of landfalls during El Nino years was Audrey. Well, not a lot of people here may remember Audrey, but people in southwest Louisiana and Cameron Parish remember Audrey. It was a June storm, had very little notice of it, and a big hurricane produced a big storm surge. So we need to be ready in June. The last slide I've got was the least active season on record, only 4 named storms, a very significant El Nino, the 82-83 El Nino. First storm of the year occurred in August. Again, it went right over my house in Sharpstown, and it's our last major hurricane landfall in southeast Texas. You see Alicia there, a Gulf former. Well, thank you for your attention. I appreciate it, and I hope we all have good luck this year. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Bill Reed. Bill Reed is our local hurricane expert. Bill's goal is to bring his lifetime experience to educate the public on how they can better be prepared when a hurricane is coming their way. Bill has served as the director for the National Hurricane Center, and he is the hurricane expert for KPRC. Welcome, Bill.
Okay, how many in here have been to more than 25 of these meetings? There's several of you that could probably give my talk then, because that's how many of these now that I've been to. And it's my pleasure to be here. It's nice to know when you're mostly retired, people still want to pick your brain on some of the stuff you know. I kind of thought maybe we're all getting a little tired of hearing about Ike. It's not that it's not important and we shouldn't keep learning about it, but there was another storm 3 years before it, Hurricane Rita, that I'm sure everyone remembers for the horrific evacuation that we went through. Now, Rita formed out in the, I think this is right. Yep, doesn't hit it too far. It formed out in the Bahamas. It was a cluster of the same kind of weather conditions that Katrina had formed in 3 weeks prior to that, which it also got its act together in the Bahamas. And it just steadily progressed as it came through the Florida Straits. It was a Category 1 hurricane as it approached the Keys, Category 2 when it got just to the west of the Keys, and then it went nuts. It went from a Category 2 to a Category 5 in 24 hours, what we call rapid intensification. And I've gone back and looked at most of the hurricanes that reached Category 3, 4, and 5 have gone through at least one cycle of rapid intensification. And in 2005, we had our verification of our forecast showed quite clearly that we had virtually no skill at forecasting rapid intensification. We didn't have the data. Some of the things that cause rapid intensification weren't clearly understood at the time. The other thing that stood out on Rita's case was from the start, from when it formed up, all our models were forecasting a Texas landfall. It consistently pointed it towards somewhere between Corpus Christi and Sabine Pass in the forecast. And as you see on that track, it barely stayed within that forecast. it actually was not one of our best forecast stories. Our average forecast error is lower than what the forecast error was for Rita, especially in the day 1, 2, and 3 forecasts, where it's very important that we get it right. Okay. Here's an image of what it looked like at its peak intensity. And at that time, it was at 895 millibars. To find 895 millibars right now, you have to go up almost 5,000 feet above us. That's how much atmosphere had been removed from the ambient pressure around it. And the research planes fly that storm at 850 millibars. They actually had to go up when they came into the eye because they would have flown way too low to go into the storm. It had a huge eye wall, and it was perfectly defined. It also happened to be at a location for which your local officials have to make decisions about evacuation. It's actually very easy to make a decision when there's a Category 5 storm at the time you're making that decision. Ike, on the other hand, was a Category 2, and there were some challenges in making that decision to evacuate because back of your mind you're saying, well, what if it doesn't intensify? Maybe we won't have a problem here. So in many respects, it was an easy storm to decide to evacuate for because of the intensity it was at the time we had to make the call. And this is what the forecast looked like at the time we made the call. The center of the storm was to keep going west. We were forecasting it to come down it was a Category 5 at the time with 185 mile an hour winds. Huge. It was a record low pressure for the Atlantic. It only lasted a month, and then we had Wilma go a few millibars below that even. Nature of the 2005 season. So at the time the decision was made, the storm was forecast to go west and then northwest and make landfall just to the southwest of the Houston-Galveston area, which is about as bad a case scenario as you can face because that puts you on the so-called dirty side of a very large and very powerful hurricane. And that was the information that everybody had in their sights as that came up. I'm sure Frank was going absolutely ballistic on the air with how intense this storm was, as was everybody else. Tell you how bad it was, I didn't have to order my wife to leave. She tapped me on the shoulder. It was like 3 a.m. before the big evacuation started and says, got the car packed, there's 3 dogs there with me, I'll call you when I get to San Antonio. Hallelujah. Because it would take bribery and a 2x4 normally to get her to have to go like that. The evacuation ended up being the story that we're all going to remember from Rita because of how horrific it was. We initiated it during the day in various stages on Wednesday, September 21st. Now, the weather people don't initiate it. We provide the guidance, and it's all in the plans of your elected. It's the responsibility of the mayors and county judges to pull the plug. And they're listening to advice from their emergency managers as to exactly what this all means and is it time to pull the plug based on our plans. And this was followed in Galveston County, because I was right there with them. The plan was followed to a T. The right decisions were made at the right time. The problem was we had this little event called Katrina 3 weeks before, and we had over 250,000 folks from Louisiana living here in the Houston-Galveston area. We were all in somewhat shock at what we had seen happen to Louisiana. And even though the same thing isn't going to happen here, there's different geography. So we're not going to get the kind of flood they had in Louisiana, but it would certainly be real bad, a hurricane of Rita's magnitude coming in here, much worse than what we saw with Ike. Because of Katrina, a lot of people, we had no problem getting people to leave. I'll tell you that. The response in my neighborhood and the east side of League City was almost unanimous. There was very few people left that did not heed the warnings and go. We also had miscommunication from elected officials at the state and city level in the inland, basically telling people, run for the hills. Well, that's not the message you want to say to a population that's already a little bit jumpy because of what happened in Katrina. And we had a mass, I won't call it a panic, but it was as close to a panic as you get, where just about everybody considered leaving Houston. They all didn't, but enough did that it completely destroyed the plan for the evacuation of you folks from the coastal areas. And I'm always a little worried that if you went through that, you'd probably say, I would rather drown than go through that evacuation again. I've heard people say that. I can't imagine being stuck on the road more than 24 hours, moving less than 5 miles an hour. It'd be horrible. And that's what it took. Was more than 24 hours for a lot. There were more people who died in the evacuation because of their pre-existing medical condition or heat than were killed by the direct effects of the storm itself. So what happened? Well, two things happened that made us come out of this thing pretty much unscathed. Shortly after the forecast that the decision made to evacuate was on, the storm took just a little jog to the right of the track. Well, over time, that magnified out, and the storm center itself went right over Sabine Pass instead of coming to the west of Galveston. It was within the skill of our forecast then, but it makes a huge difference which side of the eye you're on when the storm comes in, exactly like we saw with Ike. The impacts, the rainfall as shown there was in the 5 to 10 inch, a few spots of 15 inches, very typical of a landfalling tropical cyclone. From Louisiana and Mississippi all the way up into Tennessee, there were numerous tornadoes, which is where you'd expect them to occur. And there was a violent storm surge, and I think most people have forgotten how violent it was because the southwest coast of Louisiana is sparsely populated. There's Cameron, and then there's Holly Beach, and a few other communities a little bit inland. Well, this is what was left of Holly Beach, virtually nothing. Looks just like the Bolivar did after Ike, doesn't it? Well, that's what happened. They had a 15-foot storm surge come in over southwest Louisiana, and it pretty well wiped out the beachfront communities there, and it pushed the storm surge up the bayous and river north of Interstate 10. So Rita was nothing to sniff at. It had weakened just like Katrina had. It went from a Category 5 to a Category 3 at landfall, but a lot of that energy is involved in spreading out of the wind, so there was a huge area impact of the storm surge. We had some elevation all the way over here, and they had reflooding of parts of New Orleans where the breaches in the levees were from Rita, even though Rita was well over 150 miles from areas that flooded in New Orleans. What's changed since Rita? The track forecast skill has improved by 30%. About 3% a year our skill at modeling these storms. It's almost precisely due to the modeling efforts and higher powered computers that we can put more sophistication in the computer to run those models. I don't have an example from Rita itself, but the track on the cone on the left there represented the actual forecast for Katrina. The one on the right is if we were doing it now. And by reducing the amount of error in there, I think we can fine-tune how much we have people evacuating at the time of the storm, at least laterally along the coast. And the evacuation plan improvements in our area are huge. You probably don't really, you're not going to know that until you actually have another evacuation. Between Rita and Ike, changes that were made in the evacuation planning make it more likely that you'll have a more controlled evacuation, especially the messaging coming from your, like Mayor of Houston, the Governor's Office of Emergency Management, will be very strong about staying put unless you have a medical condition inland that would require you to have electricity. Those folks are going to want to leave also. But and the staged evacuation where we get us out of here that are near the coast first and then work your way into the ones further inland that still may need to evacuate. I think we're going to avoid the nightmare, even though we've grown by almost 25% in 10 years in the number of people in the evacuation zones. But citizens must follow the advice of the local officials. That's the one part you can't control, is what the citizens do. I hope everyone in here knows that when the mayor calls for an evacuation, it means you. I bet you do. Okay, all I had in there was a thank you very much and a movie loop of a big hurricane, but thank you very much.
Alrighty, at this time, we are going to have our question and answer session. So if you do have any questions for our speaker, there's a mic right in front of the camera stage. You can step up to it and ask your question.
It's not so much a question. I realize that I've been here on the island for a long time. Every time a large hurricane comes in, most people don't realize it. The Back Bay builds up and comes back toward the island. All the low-lying areas it gets inundated. Most people don't know that. When they say, leave, you better leave. It's bad news. Another thing is these hurricanes spawn tornadoes. There was one run right through our neighborhood, tore up a bunch of homes. Fortunately, it didn't get mine. So if they hit one, I'm out of here. So it can cause that much damage. You see what happened in Houston to a little apartment complex. You do that to your house. And where do you run? You can't.
One of my main concerns is, what is Galveston's plan for a sudden flood? I know we're ready for a hurricane, but Houston had something happen just a week ago. All of a sudden, they had 10 and 11 inches of rain, and people died and a lot of things happened. God forbid something happens on an event weekend where we got 250,000 people on the island. What is the plan? My second question is, can or will scales that rate storms like the Saffir-Simpson be changed to include rising sea levels, warmer oceans, hotter temperatures, and climate change? Can they change or improve those scales?
I'll take the second part. I'm not going to talk to the plans for Galveston. That's their job. We spent, when I was a director at the Hurricane Center, we spent the entire 5 years researching and debating a better way to do the scales. We tried to put everything in one scale. The problem is, and Ike was a classic example, is it's not one-to-one the amount of storm surge you get, for example, as it is with the wind. So you can have a Category 2 hurricane producing storm surge that you might actually have in an average size Category 4. You'd have to account for the size of the storm, the structure of its eye wall, how fast they're moving, the underlying topography, which changes everywhere you go along the coast. It is actually easier to just tell people what's going to happen to them when it comes to storm surge than it is to have a scale, and that's what led to the storm surge warning and the inundation maps that we're coming out with now. Rainfall's even harder, which with Allison proved a tropical storm can be devastating and deadly, and it's almost a negative correlation. Our biggest rainfalls in Texas have been in tropical storms, not hurricanes. So I think the only scale we'll ever have is the one we have for wind, because a 100-mile-an-hour wind in Galveston is the same as a 100-mile-an-hour wind in Boston. We can use it universally. In fact, it's used globally. And I'll let you guys talk to the city plans.
How you doing, Sheila? Your question was, what would we do if we had some storms that came through here like Houston? Well, we would do the same thing as Houston. We get that information from the National Weather Service on an hourly basis, and we would post it on Channel 16, Facebook, and Twitter. We'd use the One Call Reaches All to inform you of that, so that you could stay inside and secure yourself and use all the, you don't need to be out driving around in those kind of storms. And if we had some high water that we felt that you needed some help in, we would come rescue with our GMR team, our Galveston Marine Response Team. Was there any other questions?
Yeah. I track the NOAA from about 1st of June every day just to see what's happening with the various storms. And my question is, at what point, without waiting for an evacuation order, at what point, when you see the track of the storms on the NOAA site, should you be getting out?
I can't speak for everybody, but I got insider information. I know the plans, and I roughly know when they'll pull the plug, and my plan is to be 6 hours ahead of the announced evacuation. But you don't have that insider information. If you're at the liberty to go whenever or get your family out whenever, the confidence I would have in the forecast from 72 hours out on in is good enough. And that's when I encourage my family and neighbors, if we were to have a threat like a Rita coming our way, would be to, if you don't have to wait to the evacuation order and it's going to come anyway within a day, beat the rush and go that way. But it's everybody, you know, if you got a job and things like that, your boss may beg to differ about you bailing out 3 days instead of waiting until the evacuation.
Thank you. I'm retired, so that's okay.
Alrighty, are there any other questions? There's a few people that I want to recognize. When I call your name, if you will, please step up to the front. We'll start with Charlie Kelly, who is our Emergency Management Coordinator for the City of Galveston. Just step up to the front. We're going to recognize you real quick. We have Peter Davis, who is the Chief of Police for Beach Patrol. I think he had to step out, but he was here earlier. We have Mike Wisco, who is our Fire Chief. Mike Mastrangelo, who is the Emergency Management Coordinator for UTMB. Kayla Rhodes, who is our Public Information Officer for the City of Galveston. Nathan Young, who's the Director of EMS for the Galveston area. Barbara Sanderson, who's the Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Galveston. The Chief of Police, Henry Pareto. Is Chief Pareto still here? I think he may have stepped out. And Charlie Olson, who's the Assistant Fire Chief for the City of Galveston. If you will, give these people a round of applause. These are the ones that help us in hurricane response and making sure that we are ready and prepared. On behalf of the City of Galveston and the Office of Emergency Management, we thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here today. If you haven't signed up for our One Call Reaches All as yet, please stop by the emergency management booth. There's also some vendors that are still here. Please stop by and visit them. We encourage you to make a plan and be prepared and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.